All right, if you're interested in learning how to go from this to this, stick around.
This is not usually a video that I would do.
All right, so today we're going to learn about digital makeup and tracking masks inside of After Effects. So the first thing we'll want to do is import some footage. In this case, I have a clip that a girl was nice enough to post on YouTube of a day where she wanted to teach you how to cover up bad skin using makeup. And so I thought that's a great idea. Let's learn how to do it digitally. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to basically do what we call digital makeup. So let's go ahead and get started. The technique for this isn't terribly difficult. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to start by dragging the video clip onto our timeline to create a comp. And then we're going to duplicate it, okay, by hitting Command D. Now I'm going to turn off the eyeball for the first track and go down to the second track, and I'm going to apply a blur effect. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and go to Effects, Blur and Sharpen. There we go, Blur and Sharpen, and we'll apply a Gaussian blur. Now the idea of this is what we're going to do is we're going to take the top clip and basically punch holes through it to reveal certain parts of the bottom clip. And on the bottom clip, we're going to add a blur effect to smooth out some of the more noticeable spots. So what I'm going to do right now is zoom in a little bit by hitting Command plus, so I can really just kind of see where the darkest spots are. Now there's a few additional tricks we can do, like a little bit of desaturating our reds that might help as well, but we don't want to really overly affect things, because once we start to tweak the colors, you got to remember only some of this is going to show through. So first thing we want to do is try to simply blur out the intensity of some of these spots. So we'll go ahead and adjust our blur up to about, I don't know, I think 15 to 20 seems good. When we're done, we'll go ahead and kind of relook at it and make sure that it feels good in the final edit. But right now I'm going to set it to 15. And if I zoom out, you'll see that now most of the main spots have pretty much disappeared thanks to the blur. And even some of these ones that we can still see will be majorly reduced by this effect. Now, obviously, this isn't good for anything because we've completely blurred her out. And that's why we need the top track. What we're going to do on the top track is take advantage of masks and the track mask tools in order to basically just let the bottom track show through in certain parts. And we're going to feather the edges to try to blend it together. So that's going to look something like this. If we select the top clip and we go up to our pen tool, we can then start to draw some masks. And what you really want to make sure of when you do this is that you don't mask all the way to the edge of her face. We're going to have to feather these edges on this mask. When you feather, it feathers in both directions. It feathers into the mask and out of the mask. And so you want to avoid softening any of these edges on her face because it'll become instantly noticeable and make your original image look a lot worse. So what I like to do is give myself a little bit of a sort of a safety area there. And I mean, quite honestly, I don't really need to worry about this space as much as I do up here. But for the sake of this, I'm going to come right around here and grab this area right in here. Now make sure that you avoid any hard edges, meaning 90-degree angles, even 45-degree angles. Try to keep this nice and soft and organic looking so that we don't see any weird angles on her face. Okay, so we've drawn a mask, and remember, you have to make sure the layer is selected when you're using the pen tool, or else it'll draw a shape. So with our layer selected, we've drawn a mask, and as we can see right now, it's kind of doing the opposite of what we want. So let's go ahead and hit the M key to open up our mask, and where it says add, we're going to switch it to subtract. And all of a sudden, we start looking a little bit better in here. Now it's pretty heavily blurred. So we'll take a look at that again. We can always drop that number down a little bit. But if I were to hide these overlays by clicking off, you'll notice that we've got a very noticeable line between where the mask is and where it isn't. So we need to feather the mask in order to help reduce that. And so let's go ahead and go to our mask and click the drop down and then open it back up. And we'll go to mask feather. I'm going to take it up to about 15 as well. So that looks pretty good right there. Now, that's the easy part, unfortunately. Since this is video, we know that the second we advance to the next frame, her face is going to move. And that mask will no longer be in the right spot. If I use the page up or page down key commands to go one page forward, in this case I'm hitting page down, you can see that her face is moving, but the mask is staying in the same spot. And that's going to be a problem. So what we need to do is we need to track that mask to her face. Now the good news is After Effects has added some tools to help us do this. The bad news is they don't really work, or at least they don't work in this situation. But they will help us. So let's go ahead and talk about our next step here. In fact, let's go ahead and look at the tracker tools that we have available. And so again, at this point, we want this to automatically track to her face. And so in order to track a mask, what you basically do is you right click on the mask itself and you'll see the option to track that mask. Then come down here, and if we go to method, we'll see position, position, scale, and rotation, position, scale, rotation, and skew, and so on. And we'll also see face tracking, outline, and face tracking detailed features. Now, the problem we run into is that we're not tracking the outline of her face. So face tracking outline won't work. If we wanted to track the entire face, we could do that, and we'd get okay results. Face tracking detailed isn't really going to help us either, and I'll show you what happens if we try it. Basically what it's going to ask you to do is set a resting pose. So if we jump forward here to maybe where her mouth is closed, and we set that as our resting pose, we can then go back here and apply that mask. And let's watch what happens here when I go to apply this mask. Now, where it says analyze, that's basically where you tell After Effects to look at the information and the image and do its best to track that mask. And so if we allow it to play, you can see it's actually doing pretty well. It's not slipping around a whole lot, but it's also not really doing what we need it to do. So if we stop it right there at about 5 seconds, let's go back and look at what we got. Notice that all of these little keyframes here are essentially the mask path, this being our mask path. And they're basically keyframing little tweaks to this path for every single frame. If we go frame by frame, you can see now, let's go ahead and click on our mask so we can actually see the shape. If I go page down now, you'll see that it's kind of moving the mask with her face and it's not doing a terrible job. But the point is, it's just kind of all over the place. It's not doing the job we would do if we were doing it by hand. I would be extending this mask. Now, here's the cool thing. I could come up here and with the pen tool, I could hold down Shift and click on this point right here and stretch the mask out. Now, that's going to help a lot, but you'll notice if I go back a frame, it goes back to where it started. And if I go forward a frame, it jumps back to where it was. So essentially, if I'm going to make this change here, I need to then recalculate all this tracking info, which is no big deal. We just come over and hit the play button again. But now you can see that it's not working. Or it's, so, you know, we could stop it at this point and kind of move it around and auto track it again. I call this babysitting the mask, basically. But as you can see, it's just not doing what a human would do. And this is the reality of tracking masks. Sometimes it works great. If you have a rectangular logo on a t-shirt and the company has changed their logo and you need to track a new one over it, that's what mask tracking is awesome for. It will stick to a high contrast shape on a t-shirt or something like that. And I wouldn't doubt that we could track eyes or lips or eyebrows or things that really stood out pretty effectively with this. But unfortunately, we're just not going to get the results with the face tracker that we want. And this is a reality of auto tracking. So how can we use this to our advantage? Well, I'll show you. The reality is we're going to have to move this mask by hand. Meaning that if you've got footage that's 60 frames a second, that's going to be 60 times you have to move that mask per second of footage. Now in this case, we're only going to do about 10 seconds of footage. And obviously we're at 24 frames a second, which will help quite a bit. So I'm going to come over here and shorten my comp down to 10 seconds. And now let's go through the process as we're going to do it. And I'll show you how we can take advantage of the mask tracker to a degree. So once again, I've deleted my mask by just clicking on it and hitting delete. I'm going to go ahead and grab the pen tool again and come up here and draw my mask one more time. Now in this case, you'll notice we're getting a pink mask, which against her complexion might be a little tough to see at times. You'll also notice that when I come up right here, I get a very angular looking edge to my mask. I want to change that. So what I need to do is I need to go up to the pen tool, come down to the Convert Vertices tool or Convert Vertex tool. You could also hit the G key a few times and it would take you there. But now I can click on this and notice it smooths it out right away. It also gives me Bezier handles if I want to make any personal adjustments. But overall, everything here looks pretty good. And I think we can run with this. Maybe we want to click this one, so I'll hit the G key again. And there we go. Try to get that. I'm going between the G key and the V key. Okay, so we have our mask here. Let's go ahead and you can invert it or you could just turn it off. Or you could switch it to subtract. Any of those things right now will be fine. If we turn it off, then we can see the outline without actually seeing what it's doing, which at this point is just fine. Maybe I'll scoot this in just a little bit to avoid hitting that edge. Okay, so now we're here. And one of the things that you want to take into consideration when you're drawing a mask that you're going to manually track is that you want to make sure you have as few control points as possible because you're going to have to move them around. So let's go in and remove a couple of these control points. For example, this one right here seems like one we could probably get rid of. So I'm just going to select it and hit delete. And notice that I still have a pretty decent round shape. I could potentially get rid of that one, hit delete. Now again, I'll have to come in here and adjust my Bezier handles a little bit, but overall I can pretty much get the same result with one less path or one less point. Let's click this one right here and delete that one too. All right, so now we've got a pretty decent looking mask, and if we need to add more points to it, we can later, but right now we got 5 points and that's pretty reasonable. So what I like to do at this point is right click on it and choose track mask. But I'm really just using this to go frame by frame, and I'm going to manipulate the mask myself. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it from face tracking to, again, I could leave it on face tracking. I'll just set it to position, scale, and rotation. And this button right here will track the entire scene. If you press it, it will just start going and keep going. This will do it in reverse, but these two on the outside will go one frame at a time. All right, and so before we do anything, let's make sure we come down to our mask and click the stopwatch to add our first keyframe. And what it's doing is it's essentially marking each position of this mask. Now, the next step is to either click this button to advance forward a frame, and I can keep doing that. And each time I do it, you'll notice that it's adding keyframes. If I hit the plus key, you'll see that we now have keyframes for each of these positions. If I click back on the mask path, I can keep doing this until basically it fails. So I can click, I consider each one of these that works kind of getting a free ride because I don't have to do anything. I can just keep clicking it. But eventually she's going to turn her face, or we're going to see these edges getting a little bit too close to the edge. In fact, let's go ahead and just for the sake of it, let's turn our mask on by setting it to subtract. There we go. Now again, we can see these little hard edges down here. So we can go ahead and go to feather, crank that feather up to about 15. And that's basically doing about 7 pixels in and 7 pixels out. And now that looks pretty good. I want to make sure that I don't blur past that edge. All right, so now that we're actually seeing what the mask is doing, let's go back to the mask and back to our frame forward button. And so I'm basically watching it at this point, going, okay, I can start to see a little something popping out right there. So if I hold down Shift and I click on this point right here with the selection tool selected, I'm not using the pen tool, I'm using the V key basically, I can come over here now and slide that out. Cool. And then I'll go to the next one. All right, now it's probably going to need to slide these out a little further. And I'm basically going frame by frame and modifying all of these keyframes by hand, but I'm taking advantage of the tracker to kind of move the mask for me and advance frame by frame. Again, looking pretty good. Now, if at any point I kind of change my mind or I want to come back here to this point, as long as I'm over the keyframe, I can adjust it and it'll automatically update. So in this case, we got these kind of little spots that started showing in. So if I just slide that up a little bit, we can hide those. Now, if I go to this next keyframe, it's going to jump right back and show them again. So at this point, I want to track forward over these track points. So go frame by frame. And again, I'm just watching, looking for anything that I might want to adjust. And we're looking pretty good. We've still got a little bit of edge there. It might be time to start moving this away from that edge and bringing this down a little bit. And we'll go forward. Okay. Again, just making sure that we stay well clear of any details or things that we don't want to cover up. I'm getting a little close there, so I'll bring this in. And notice that now if we zoom out a little bit, let's see, where are we? We're at almost 2 seconds. So once you get the hang of this, it starts to move pretty quickly. And so just keep on going forward here. Again, just adjusting it as needed and then bring it forward again. And just making sure. You'll notice, you can see here, when it starts to blur out the edge of her face, it becomes really noticeable. So we'll bring that in, maybe even adjust that handle in a little bit. Try to avoid that sharp corner. And there we go. Okay, and again, I'm just going to keep tracking forward a frame at a time, adjusting these points as needed. All right, so there's clearly one where we're way too close to the edge. So we'll start bringing this down a little bit and bringing this up and making these adjustments. Now, here's one issue you might want to change. We have a pink mask on a very light complexion, and if that is hard for you to see, it's very easy to change these mask colors by just clicking on the color next to the mask and turning this into something that stands out really nicely against skin. So now again, back to this. We'll go forward a few frames. It's looking good. We'll start to bring this in. And you can see that, you know, with a podcast going in the background or some music, that this isn't terribly grueling. And the results are really pretty impressive considering what we can do with this. And so let's go up to about 5 seconds and then we'll stop and take a look. All right. As long as her face doesn't move much, we don't really have to adjust much. It's when she turns her face or makes, you know, big expressions that we're going to need to make adjustments. So I'll start to kind of peel this down a little bit, get it back closer to that edge. Maybe bring that a little bit away from her nose. I don't want to lose the little smile lines in there. And continue on. So we're just about to 5 seconds. And we'll go ahead and stop there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring my work bar down to 5 seconds. Now you guys will need to do 10 seconds, but in this case, let's go see how this looks. So if we hit the play button.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is not usually a video that I would do.
Okay, overall it's looking pretty good. And again, if I go frame by frame, I can really see what the mask is doing. Overall, I'm not seeing too much evidence of the work we did. I'm not seeing too many spots where I think we missed. So there's mask number 1. Now we're going to do 4 of these, okay? Because if we look at her face, it's fair to say that the chin needs one, this cheek over here needs one, and arguably we could do one on the forehead as well. Now the chin one we might have a little better time with the tracker, meaning that the chin is a pretty consistent shape. Let's just give a shot at auto tracking the chin. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a new mask. All right, so we have mask number 1. I'm going to select the layer. I'm going to go up to the pen tool. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create mask number 2. And I'm just going to create a little oval around her chin. All right. Now, again, let's zoom in and let's kind of look at what we're working with here. Maybe use the selection tool and modify some of these points just a little bit. Keep them nice and round. Maybe bring that up just a touch. Remember that we're going to feather this, and it's going to feather both inwards and outwards towards the edge, and we definitely don't want to feather over the edge of her chin. Okay, so now we have mask number 2, and notice that it's also green. That's going to get confusing. So let's click on mask number 2 and set it to blue. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and title these by clicking on mask number 1 and hit return and call this left cheek. So LCHK works fine for me. And we'll go down to mask. We'll hit return. Mask number 2, we'll hit return. Call this chin. And then select it. Put our playhead back at the beginning. We'll set it to subtract. See how that looks? Looks very nice. Now remember, we have to come down to mask path and click the stopwatch. That's going to set our mask path keyframe. And then we'll right click on it and choose track mask. But notice that's not showing up right now. Let's try that again. Right click on it and track mask. Now again, for this one we might get lucky with the face tracking or with the detailed tracking. Let's find out. Let's start off with, again, this is going to be outline only, so this isn't really designed to just do parts of the face. Let's try face tracking detailed features. And again, setting rest pose may or may not help us in this situation. Let's go ahead and track forward and see what happens. Okay, so let's stop it right there. And let's go back and see what we got. So overall, it's looking pretty good. It's looking like we only really went over in a couple spots. Again, I'm just making sure we have a little sort of gutter there between the edge of the chin and the mask. And if we look forward here, everything looks pretty good except right there. So at this point, I want to go page up and find the frame where it goes past her chin, and it's that frame right there. Now what I can do, hold down shift and left click on these points, and it'll allow me to kind of tuck them back in. So now that I've fixed it, I need to retrack over these existing keyframes. So let's try it again. All right, it looks great. It looks like we got everything we were looking for right there. So sometimes you get lucky, and those are the good days. Sometimes you have to do every single one frame by frame, and those are the rougher days. But if we back out now, take a look, let's click off, and we can see that one more time now that it's rendered.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is not usually a...
Okay, notice that maybe we missed a couple spots. Seems like it's going a little wide there. Now, there's a couple things we can do. We could expand our mask a little bit further. We have the option to do some mask expansion. Again, the problem is we want to make sure that we don't expand it over the chin. But if we just come down here and expand the mask by 10 pixels, or maybe 15 pixels, it looks like, again, we're probably going a little too far out there. But basically what that did was that expanded our mask 13 pixels out. And you'll see that it did kind of tackle those two problems on the edge there, but I might want to pull my feather back in a little bit now and maybe bring that expansion back just a touch, because I don't want to feather over her chin. It'll basically cause the image just to look soft and weird. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. All right. So if that one's looking good, let's move on to the next one. All right, and there we go. So at this point, we have 4 masks all working together. Let's go ahead and zoom out to take a look at our image here, and let's see what we've got. Shift Command H. You'll notice that if I select this, that shows everything. If I click on the layer, if I hit Shift Command H, it hides all of that. And so now I can hit the play key, let this play forward. And again, perfection was not the goal, but definitely a noticeable improvement over where we started. And now, just since we're here, let's go ahead and try to add just a slight bit of desaturation of our reds to our bottom layer. If we think about it, the bottom layer, let's go ahead and title this. This is the corrective layer, because this is the layer that has the blur on it. So any corrections that we want to do to try to minimize this, we want to do to our corrective layer so that we're not messing up our top layer. So we'll turn the top layer off. And again, when I look at this layer, I'm just thinking of it in terms of what's going to show through. So if we come up, actually let's just right click, go to Effects. We'll go to Color Correction and we'll set it to Lumetri Color. Now I'm going to go to Curves. I'm going to go to Hue versus Saturation, and I'm actually going to use the eyedropper and click right there on that spot. All right, and there's the color. So we've got these 3 dots right here, and the one in the middle is the one that I want to pull. And if I pull it down, it's going to desaturate the red in that spot. Now again, I don't want to go crazy with this. Notice that right about there, it's pretty much disappeared. But it's also taken on a different color. So I don't want to get crazy. I'm just going to drop it down a little bit. And again, hue versus saturation just means you pick the color, and by dragging it down, you're desaturating that color. So let's go ahead and shrink it down, take one last look. And there we are. There's the after. Again, to really appreciate this, you got to look at the before. There was our before. So this can be used for special effects. This can be used just for any purpose you want. I've filmed people that have been sweaty, where I've used this effect to clean off sweat marks. I've heard of actors talking about having compositors go in and pull the bags out from under their eyes in scenes if they've been too tired. So digital makeup is an absolutely accurate and effective way to fix areas on the face, as well as getting used to tracking masks. All right.